This is Willy Vlautin, and you're listening to Time to Connect.
Hey, Willy Vlautin, thanks so much, man, for taking the time to connect.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man, I've wanted to get you on this podcast for a while. I'm one of your biggest fans. I have been for many years, and big admirer of both your music and your novels. We've got a lot to talk about today. I think this is the new novel is going to be the one of the main topics of discussion for sure. You come to us, I'm guessing, from Portland.
I live like 30 miles north of Portland,
Do
outside
you?
of a little town called Scappoose. But yeah, basically out of Portland.
How long have you? I know you grew up in the Reno area. Is that right?
Yeah, I think I moved up when I was 27. Um, you know, um,
So 3 years ago.
no, man, I lived up here a long time. I was just too weird for Reno. I was
Uh-huh.
a failed musician and writing novels that I never showed anybody. But my mom was real conservative, and the guys I grew up with were pretty conservative. And my music was too weird for Reno, and so I saw this band from Portland called Cracker Bash. A guy named Sean Crogan was their lead guy, and I saw him play a little bar in Reno, and he told me about Portland, and it was the least scary city on the West Coast. I was scared. I didn't want to. I loved Reno, and I didn't want to be farther than 1 car day drive, so like 10 hours. And I was, scared of Los Angeles, not rich enough for San Francisco, and scared of Seattle. And then I worked at a trucking company, and they had an opening in Portland, and so I transferred up, and that's what brought me to Portland. And uh, uh, I was scared shitless, because it was the biggest city I'd ever lived in, and it rained all the time. But man, there was so many bands, so many cool bands, and rents were cheap, so
Mhm.
it was a perfect landing spot, So
What year would that have been?
I think like 94, 90,
Okay.
somewhere around there.
Yeah.
All my friends were from like Idaho. I had a friend from Montana, Wyoming, Michigan, like all these guys moving for the same reason. And, like either guys from small towns or, states where they couldn't, gig is a small time musician.
hmm hmm when did Richmond Fontaine start up? What year would that have been?
I mean, within 6 or 7, maybe a year of me moving up there.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a lot of tunes, and then I met I met it. I met this kid, drummer, who had confidence. I never had any confidence. That was my big. It's always been a big monkey on my back. And I met this kid. We started playing together, and he thought we were going to be Pearl Jam. And I said, look, man, have you listened to my lyrics? Have you heard my voice? And I didn't play sober or not totally loaded until I was like 35, because I was so shy. So I wasn't like a great front man either. But then we got a guy from Michigan, named Dave Harding, who was the bass player all through most of the run of Fontaine until he moved away to Denmark. So he and I pretty much just stuck it out the whole run. And I don't know why. I don't think we just didn't have anything else going on really. But yeah, he and I were lifers.
Well, man, I've heard you be a little bit self-effacing about your front man status. I for one, I love Richmond Fontaine, man. I got to see you guys once in Austin. I think you were sharing a bill with either Centromatic or South San Gabriel in Austin. That had to be, gosh, I don't know, early 2000s, something like that. Is that
Yeah, I
ring
think that's
true?
like 2004, and I think you're right. It was South San Gabriel.
Yeah.
And we had Amy Boone, who's the singer of the Delines' sister, Deborah Kelly, sang a song or a couple songs maybe with us.
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah, no, man, I like Fontaine. It's just
Yeah.
I love those guys more than anything. I mean, I would have kept the band going just to hang out, keep hanging out with those guys, even after all the years. I love those guys. But yeah, no, you know, it's I just, you know, I'm a little too dented to be Pearl Jam, but this poor kid, man, he sure thought we were going to be big.
But you like and you prefer the kind of situation you have now with Delines, where you're not the front man.
A couple things, you know, I always felt guilty, you know, I mean, as a front man, I always felt guilty that Fontaine didn't make more money, you know, because for the guys,
Yeah.
I always felt pretty, I wanted to do those guys right. I mean, when we get to start touring Europe, I felt like I paid him back a little bit because we had some really good adventures and we all got passports and we had a good run doing that. So I felt a little bit better, but I always felt responsible, you know, because they're my sons and all that. And then, you know, as you get older, you know, my favorite singers have always been women. I'm a ballad guy. You know, at home, I just mostly listen to ballads. And you know, my dream was always to be in a kind of a really kind of David Lynchy lounge band with the woman singer who I believe in. And then, yeah, you're right.
There now.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
And I, you know, and then I could disappear in the back. You know, when I was like, I guess when I was 15, I said when I was 25, I'd never do manual labor again, and I could dress like the Pogues in a black suit. And you know, and then that turned to 30, and then 35, and then 40, and then 45, and then when the line started, I said, "Can we all wear black suits? Because I'm wearing a black suit because I want to be, you know, it's never too late to be, you know, a guy that doesn't do manual labor and dresses like the Pogues." So that was always my dream too. And so I made the guy for the first couple of years, I made everyone wear black suits so we could be in the Pogues. And now I'm the only guy that still does it. But yeah, I love it. I could do those gigs for the rest of my life, you know. They're easy and I can hear her sing every night and she's funnier than hell, man. And she's really cool and tough as shit, man. And so she's just a pleasure to tour with.
She was wasn't she in the Damnations here in Austin back in those days? Is that how you met her? So through some sort of gig together or something?
Yeah, we kind of came up together and then we toured and I was working on that record Post the Wire, Richmond Fontaine. Some of it was around 2003, 2004.
Great record.
And we were in the process of working it out and I wanted it to the two songs to be duets and we did like a West Coast run with the Damnations. And I told myself, the first sister that smiles to me and we start talking, I'll ask her if she'll sing on the song. And it was Deborah.
Okay.
She was just cool. And she goes, yeah, I'll sing on it. I played the song for her. And she goes, yeah, man, I'll do a duet with you. And then she did. And so that's kind of how we met. And then I convinced her, I want to say 9 years later to be a part of this really weird record we did called The High Country. And she came up and sang all those songs. And she said she's real cool too, man. But like, you know, not dark-minded like me. She says, I just thought about my dog dying every time I sang any of your songs so I could get in the right headspace. But then she got pregnant when we were going to go tour together. And she goes, what about Amy? And I said, well, of course. And so Amy did that tour with Fontaine. And that's, you know, we were doing a radio show and she was playing piano in the control room or in the studio. And I was in the control room and it was a hot mic, man. I just heard her singing a ballad, like real quiet. And I said, man, I want to grow old with her singing. Nice. And then I just went home maybe for a year. I secretly wrote her tunes and just, you know, obsessively wrote songs for her. And then I wrote her like a little essay. She says she still has it of why she should, you know, waste her life and join up with me. And then she came up to Portland. I put a band together with Sean Oldham, the drummer of Fontaine. We put a band together and she came up and we cut I think she was here a week. We practiced 3 times and then cut the first record, Colfax. So, and people seem to like it enough for us to keep going, which is a lucky thing.
Yeah, man. Yeah, absolutely. There's so much we could talk about, Willie, and I don't want to take too much of your time. And maybe I'll just kind of bounce around if that's okay with you. You mentioned that she said she thinks about her dog dying when she sings your lyrics. Your novels and your songs are not exactly let's keep on the sunny side of life, shall we say. It's often about characters who've things are tough for them. They've made bad decisions. They're heartbroken. What draws you to that kind of material, do you think?
I was like that as a kid, man. I don't know what's genetic and what's the way I was raised. I mean, probably both, a combination of both. So by the time I was 12, I was writing pretty dark tunes. I didn't know anything about anything, but they were pretty dark. And when I started writing stories, but that being said, when I was a kid, I was always trying to write like X. I was always trying to write Johnny Hit and Run Pauline, the phone's off the hook, but you're not, the world's a mess, it's in my kiss. Those really catchy one-liners that I think Guin came up with a lot of those. But it wasn't I couldn't come up with any of that stuff. I was real frustrated. I wrote a lot of tunes, but they're all really bad. And then around 18, I just started writing a novel one day. I just went to the library and just started writing a story, and it turned into a novel. And then the story got darker and darker, and I had no idea why. I wasn't, I'd not gone to therapy or wasn't very self-aware. I wasn't reading self-help books. I didn't know shit. I just knew the story was really dark, and I had no idea why, and scared the hell out of me. I was like, who am I, man? Why would I do this stuff? And then my songs became stories because of the writing the novel. My songs, I gave up on trying to be cool like X and just started writing these really long story songs that were, story over melody, story over choruses, story over anyone liking it. But yeah, they were dark, man. So yeah, it's a combination of being dented as a kid and probably just like generational stuff. I don't know, man, but they are dark. I don't think they're as dark as everybody else thinks, but I always say if you put my guys in a Mercedes in a suit and gave them a different job and had the same edge to them, people wouldn't think they're as dark as they are. But you throw in working class stuff and you make it people think it's grittier. The reason I write that stuff is, man, I never had any. I'd like to write the Mercedes one, man. I always wanted to write a James Bond espionage in France, and I've never been to those places in that regard, and I didn't grow up that way. So
I think a little bit. I'm thinking about that great quote that I'll bet you've seen or heard when an interviewer asked Townes Van Zandt, "Townes, why are all of your songs so sad? Does that ring a bell to you?"
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and he said they're not all sad. Some of them are downright hopeless.
Yeah.
But the real key for me is then there's a pause and the piercing look. He looks at that interviewer and he says, "Besides, you don't think life's sad?"
I mean, I just remember from the documentary where I think his wife, they had an apartment and there was like a walk-in closet maybe that he used as his place to write tunes, and they just gotten married, I think, and he walks in there and tinkers around for a while, comes out with waiting around to die, and she thinks it's gonna be like, "I love you, baby." We're gonna live a life of sea and sand, and she's like, "Holy hell!" And I relate to that. I love Townes, but Townes and Elliott Smith, I can't. I have all the records, but when you see me pulling a Townes record out or a Elliott Smith record, man, that means something's not good in my world, and I'm scared when I go down the hole on both those guys because man, it's tough. It takes me to a hard place, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, well, hey, let me ask you about, I want to get into some of these books and also a little more into your music, but I want to ask you about two things that I've noticed in your writing. And by the way, I should kind of do a little show and tell here. This is the new one. I think I got this order right. First book, Motel Life,
Mm-hmm.
and then we had North Line,
Yep.
Lean on Pete, one of my favorites, The Free.
Yep.
You signed all these, by the way. I don't know if you know that. Don't Skip Out on Me, another one of my favorites. And The Night Always Comes. And a couple of these have been made into films. I want to ask you about that. I also want to ask you about the Audible thing, because I both read The Horse and listening to it on Audible. And I'm so glad you read it, because, you know, trying to do that audiobook thing, it's so dependent on the reader. You know, there's some terrific books that I just said I can't do it because I don't dig the reader, and there's other books that I may not have liked that much, but because the reader is so good, it got me through. And I really enjoy you as a reader. I'll just ask you that question while I'm there. Is that something you had to campaign for, or is that something they asked you to do, or how do you end up through Audible being the reader of your own book?
I mean, I was a fan of, I've always been like before everybody else, you know, before the phone, I guess when they were on cassettes and CDs, right. I was a big fan. So I'd always kind of followed audiobooks, and they weren't a big deal. Like no one cared about audiobooks before, you know, Libby and the phone and all that. But I'd always had an eye on it. I always liked doing that stuff. And then I did just for fun, I did a thing called A Jockey's Christmas, which was like a short story audiobook about an overweight jockey at home for Christmas, you know.
Yeah.
And I loved doing that. And then I did
another uplifting story, by the way.
Hey man, he does get it. He gets back all the money he lost, and he gets a new job, man.
Okay.
So,
right. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
And he's got sisters that like him. So I thought he turned out pretty good. But yes, yeah. It's just like he fell through thin ice and then suddenly reappeared in dry on the same thin ice, but he's keeping going. And then I did another one called A Motorcycle for a Horse. And then I did one called the Kill Switch. So I'd like doing them on my own. And then, yeah, I campaigned for it when, you know, first, you know, they don't really care. The Motel Life and Northline weren't made, but I own the rights to the audio. I always kept the audiobook rights because they didn't want them back then. And then when Lean on Pete was doing good, I asked if I could do it, and they said they'd listen to the others, the jockey one, and they said, yeah, give it a shot. And then, but as it's gotten more popular, I have to campaign for it every time. I have to reconvince them every time that I'm the guy. I don't know if I'm that good at it, but I like doing it.
Yeah, and I think you are. I really think you are. I think there's probably, you have an advantage over someone else reading the book because you wrote it, and you have an excellent voice, and you know how to read it. And man, I could listen to it again and probably will. Well, I was going to ask you the two things that I wanted to ask you about that I notice in your, maybe in your song lyrics, but definitely in your novels, the word nerves. You know, I don't hear that word much, that phrase much anymore. I heard it a lot as I was a kid, you know, like my nerves are shot, or I didn't have the nerve to do that. I don't know if you've ever thought about that, but man, that word comes up a lot in your writing. Do you have anything to say about that? Do you want to respond to that at all?
I mean, I just grew up saying, man, my nerves are shot. Meaning, like, I guess that would just be, it's like when you're really hungover and, you know, like somebody drops a plate and you basically have a heart attack. But yeah, man, I mean, I think by age 5 or 6, my nerves were pretty shot. I don't know. I guess that would be anxiety, panic probably. But I just always said my nerves were shot, because I don't know who said that in my family. But that's kind of the way I felt. I just kind of thought that. And so I do say that. Yeah, most of my characters have that going on one way or another, like especially in The Horse. I think Al and me are pretty similar in a lot of ways. And in that regard, sure. Yeah. So.
Yeah. The other thing was this idea of disappearing, and I'm also a songwriter, by the way, and that's a theme that has popped up a lot in my own songs. And in fact, it appears more than one place for you, but in this opening quote of the horse, where you talk about disappearing into a song, or maybe it's a friend of your brother's or something. I remember. Let's see. Yeah, 15-year-old friend of my brother's talking to me in my mom's house when I was 11. The only way to get through school is to disappear into a song. Just hum it to yourself and you'll be okay. If you hate being home, hate it here, just disappear into a song. It works, man. I'm telling you, it really works. What do you mean by disappearing?
Well, I mean, that you know, that guy was the only man that ever gave me good advice, man. My whole, well, I got a couple other pieces later on, but from, which is kind of pathetic, man. That a 15-year-old kid give you the best advice, and he gave me another advice. He says, "Look, man, if a girl likes you and wants to spend time with you," and he's 15, so he's in that mindset. He said, "Be really cool to her, treat her really good, and never tell anybody, not your mom, not your best friend, your sister, or anybody, what you guys are doing together. Never tell anybody, and she'll keep hanging out with you." And then he said, "I know you don't, I know you have a hard time going to school, and I know you have a hard time." And he goes, "You just got to disappear into a Yes song." He was obsessed with Yes.
Yeah.
And he'd say, because it'll protect you. You can live inside the song, man, and it'll protect you. And you just hum it to yourself. And I did, man. I did that. It got me through a lot of stuff. And I think what I got out of music, I was talking to Patterson Hood about this just the other day, about the idea of I didn't think of music as anything but like a movie, as an escapism. So I was always drawn to songwriters that had a strong sense of place. So Springsteen, you know, when I was 12 or 13, he had a huge darkness in him, but he had a romance into him. And suddenly you were in New Jersey living this completely kind of like 70s gritty movie life.
Yeah.
The Pogues, 12, 13, the Pogues, all of a sudden I'm in some kind of makeshift Ireland with some maniacs that's full of romance and love. Tom Waits. So I got into playing music just strictly because I love the disappearing into the songs, because it was, you know, no matter where you are. Like I was in love with Kate Bush when I was 13, because she'd had that record, The Dreaming, and every song's a dream of hers, where she's a different person in a different country. And the power of that is why I started playing music, because I didn't know, like I got so obsessed with that you don't know, you can't, I always say the same thing, but it's true. Like you can't eat the records to get closer to them. You can't hug them. There's nothing you can do. So you just kind of have to join up and try to be closer to them by being a musician or being in a band. And the only thing I had going for me is I loved Reno. Like I loved the West, and I loved a certain side of Reno. By the time I was 14, 15, I knew what I liked, and I knew what I wanted to write about. I just didn't, I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the talent to write about it very eloquently. But I had the desire, and I kept saying, I just want to write. My New Jersey is going to be Reno, because I love Reno, and I want to do the same thing. I want to put people in these weird desert places. So I knew that, but long-winded way of saying the power of disappearing is all I ever liked out of music. It was only, you know, when you get a little garage band going and you start playing bars that you realize, oh shit, I didn't even think about the whole aspect of playing in front of people.
Right.
Like the rock star idea never crossed my mind, and I had never had any interest in it. I like missed that whole boat. And Patterson loved all of it. And he was like, man, I loved it all. I loved the flamboyance and the rock and roll part of it, as well as the disappearing. But I never was that smart. So it was hard learning, man. It was hard learning for me to figure out how to be in front of people. It was hard learning. I don't know why I didn't quit, because, I barely could go to high school, man. I was so shy. But, I just I love records so much, man. I didn't know any other way but to be in a band.
So is disappearing for you just kind of the ego melts away, you become, that self-consciousness voice goes away, and you just kind of get lost in whatever it is you're doing? Is that what you mean by disappear?
No, I just mean you're not you anymore. Like when you listen to a song, like if you're 13, you're listening to Close to the Edge by Yes, or a Rush song, or Racing in the Street was a huge song for me when I was like a freshman, because it was so sad. The Springsteen song, Racing in the Street. So when I mean disappearing, I could be in that song and I wasn't me anymore. I was living inside that song. And I was the girl that was so sad she wished she wasn't even born, and I was the dude going out with the girl, and I was everybody. I was in the car. So it was like living inside a movie.
Interesting.
So that's what I mean by disappearing. And I think in a lot of ways, writing a novel, you check your own pain at the door, and then you live inside a different world, thinking about certain thoughts, or I have themes and ideas I want to get across, but it takes the edge off, because I'm not me anymore, man. I'm living in some other world.
I'm glad I asked, because I have a very different kind of approach to what this means to disappear. And when I'm playing a song, whether it's in front of a crowd or not, it's more difficult in front of a crowd because you're more self-conscious. You're the focus of attention, etc. But if I'm in this room right here and I start playing a song, I cease to exist. I don't want it to sound too melodramatic or too philosophical, but it's like the whole ego thing, that the self as separate from the world goes away, and you're just kind of in the flow of things, right?
Yeah, I'm the same. I mean, I'm the same way. It's like when you first join a band and all of a sudden you're playing a song that works. It's like, yeah, you've gone to a different place and you're not you anymore. It's the same sort of thing. You're not you anymore. That's heavenly. I mean, it's a hard thing to give up. It's a hard thing to give up.
I actually, this is a sidetrack we won't go down maybe, but I believe that's a lot of what philosophical Buddhism is about losing that sense of separate selfness. But I was talking to Bill Frisell once, and Frizzell's well into his 70s, and he tours like a madman. And I asked him, "How do you do it, Bill?" And he said, "Well," he said, "I it is tiring and all the travel, and I get to the hotel, in Denmark or somewhere, and I'm thinking, I don't know if I can even do this show tonight. I'm so tired." He said, "But as soon as I start playing, it's like I disappear, and I almost like I wake up at the end of the show and get tired again. But it's so energizing." You said it's heavenly. It's like a drug.
Well, if I could play like Bill Frisell, I'd be out there every night, dude, man.
No kidding.
But yeah, man, I've been listening to him for so long. Yeah, he's
So
one
good.
of he's one of the best, man. One of the best.
So good. I'm very fortunate. I've gotten to interview him twice. Well, let's see. You've listed as some of your influence Paul Kelly, Willie Nelson, Tom Waits, William Kennedy, Raymond Carver, John Steinbeck. I know there's a lot more. A couple people that come to mind when I think about you. Larry Brown. Larry Brown mean much to you?
Oh yeah, I remember. I took a night class within 1 week. I took a night class at the university in Reno about creative writing when I don't know, I was maybe 25 or something. And 2 days before I started the class, I went to the library and came across Wild at Heart by Barry Gifford, which is what they made into the David Lynch movie.
Right.
And that novel blew my mind. And then the first class, when I first showed the teacher one of my stories, she goes, "Have you ever heard of Larry Brown?" And I said no, and she goes, I know you, man. And she just wrote down a list, and she circled Larry Brown. Get this, Face in the Music it was.
Yeah.
So I followed Larry Brown from his very first book. I bought all his books. He was a huge hero of mine because, you know, kind of Raymond Carver is kind of why I started writing, because Carver wrote about failed men and about women that carry men, and he did a lot of other things maybe, and he was obviously a kind of a brilliant stylist, but you know, as an 18-year-old kid, um, I didn't know about any of that. I just saw the alcoholism in it, and how the women carried everything, and it was like somebody hit me in the guts reading him. Like it really floored me. It's like if you have a weakness, a darkness, and you listen to Towns, he really hits you in a way that it doesn't hit some people.
Yeah.
Carver did that for me, but it was too much for me, and I'm not that bleak. And then I read Larry Brown, and then I was like, oh, Larry Brown's more like me. He's got more, I don't know, blood and heart and romance. Maybe romance is the word. So I love Larry Brown, man.
Yeah.
So Larry Brown was always a huge guy for me.
Ron Rash.
You know, I've read a few of his, but he wasn't one of my early time guys. But I think he's a genius. I love his stuff, but you know, those guys that you know really influence you. He was one.
Okay. And just a couple of mine too: Rick Bass, Jim Harrison, Thomas McGuane. Any of those guys very important?
Yeah,
to you?
man. I did my whole. I read all McGuane's stuff, and Rick Bass is I've hung out with him. He's a great dude, and he's one of the great short story writers. I love him.
Yes.
But the funny thing is, I've been listening to Jim Harrison. I read all Harrison's stuff, as a kid, from Wolf on. But I just listened to a very big lunch. His food writing, which cracks me up. And I got my band listening to. I get my band to listen to stuff, and I got two of the people obsessed with Jim Harrison's food writing. But yeah, Harrison's another guy that's for a guy like me who can edge towards too much darkness. I think I really love guys like Harrison. That he's always the 6-year-old guy that gets the yoga, and the 25-year-old yoga instructor. And I mean, some of it's ridiculous, but it makes you laugh. And he's always drinking good wine and all that. So he's always been a writer that I save for when I go down the hole, like the Brown Dog stuff.
Right. His knowledge is so good too, man.
Yeah, he's a genius. Yeah, I forgot about that, man. In probably my early 30s, I would save his books for when I was feeling, when I fell in the hole.
Yeah. Well, hey, before too much time gets away, let's talk about the horse a little bit. Don't want to give too much away to people. How have you? I know you've been doing the book tour a little bit. How do you go about talking about the horse without maybe giving too much away? Maybe you can just give a little potted kind of.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was I guess as I get older, I started realizing that all the guys I've played music with, came up with even, most of those guys haven't quit. They might have taken little pauses here, tried something else, but they always come back to it. And, most of the guys I'm talking about never even had a little run in a band that had success.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't quit. That idea of why a person still does art, I wrote novels for 15 years where I didn't show anybody. I mean, man, I used to quit jobs to write the first draft of a novel that I knew I wasn't going to send out. So that's a weird thing. And so I was interested in that. And before that, I'd never been interested in writing about music at all. I never liked novels about rock stars. I never liked novels about musicians because it always felt false, and it was so full of the drama within the band.
Yeah.
And then like the rise and the fall, and then I found myself writing a novel about an alcoholic kind of country rock, kind of country songwriter, which is like as generic as it could be. But I was really interested in writing about the life of a journeyman musician who has been writing songs his whole life, and I was really interested in alcoholism just because it's always been, you know, a noose. It's been a noose and a buddy to me my whole life, and so you know, it was the book I really wanted to think about that as well. So it's kind of started there, and the whole idea of the horse. Well, I was working on a novel of mine called "Don't Skip Out on Me," in 2014 or something like that. And so a long time ago, and I was driving in central Nevada with this old buddy of mine, and we were maybe 30 miles from the nearest paved road. And you know, and out in central Nevada, there's huge playas, like salt flat kind of things. And we came out to one that, you know, went on for 20 miles or whatever, and barely any sagebrush around it. And we saw what looked like a statue of a black horse. So we pulled the truck over and we got out and walked to it. And then you see it's a live wild Mustang, and it's not just black. It's like it's gray, and it's got dozens and dozens of scars, you know, and the scars of living a long life, you know, like we all get them. And this horse had them all over him, showing you like, man, I've been in this scrape and that scrape. And then as we got closer, we saw I was completely blind. And it just, you know, stopped me in my tracks. You know, I have three horses. And so I have I have a weakness for them, but also that idea of like a horse's greatest fear is to be alone, and its second fear or is probably to not be able to see what scares it. And it had both those, so it was completely alone, and it couldn't see anything, and there was no water, no food. So we camped next or nearby it, and then the next day we went back into town and called the Bureau of Land Management, and they had a guy come out for it. And then we kept driving on, and but I couldn't shake it. My buddy couldn't shake it because it was probably the saddest thing I'd ever seen. Hopeless, I guess. And then you think about your own mortality. And anyway, we got even farther out to this old mining claim, you know, like a big old mining claim. Like Nevada's just littered with old mines, and from dumb fucks trying to, you know, make money in a single jack mine, they call it, like just blowing up the side of a hill, to like big corporation mines. And so we came across this mine that was, I think, decommissioned in the 50s, but it was all falling apart. But it had an assayer's office, old wooden shack that was still upright. And I told my buddy, we camped near it, and I was like, man, I'm gonna move in here. I'm gonna cut ties with everything, and just because I was touring too much and boozing too much, and my life was a little sideways anyway. And I told him, you know, man, I'm gonna quit here. And you know, the guy's known me 35 years, and he just started laughing, and he said, you know, where are you gonna plug in your record player, man?
Right.
You know, there's no electricity out here. And I was like, yeah. And he goes, and once you run out of beer and tequila, man, you're gonna hitchhike back to town and start begging your wife to take you back. And then you're gonna beg her you're gonna beg her to move down there with you, and then you're gonna go like, man, I sure wouldn't mind a bathtub running water, and then I wouldn't mind a TV so I could watch the Criterion channel, and then I wouldn't mind, you know, maybe, you know. And then he goes, man, you just start your whole life over again. You either kill yourself or start your whole life over again. So stop whining, and let's keep moving on. And we did. But so I thought about those two things about the same time, like why a guy keeps doing art and seeing that horse. I guess it all combined to me right then. This novel, you know, I never really thought I'd publish it. I just kind of wrote it for myself. I thought it might be too weird for for normal people. But it was fun. You know, I think I wrote 230 song titles and snippets of songs, and I got to write about casino bands, and so all that stuff was just a blast, man, just a blast.
Do you write songs the way Al Ward does, the way he would jot notes at the top, just kind of themes or moments, and at the top of his notebook?
Not as much as he does, but a little bit. But I do that. I have songs I just kind of tinker on. Like I'm always working on a song that, you know, it's like writing poems. You know, you spend 20 minutes on a song a day trying to see if you could crack it, or something else comes. And I just, I guess I've always kind of written a lot of tunes. And so I'm like that, and him in that way. It's just a crutch I've used, I guess. I think of it as a crutch. I kind of think it's a crutch for Al, a way of dealing with it. And then the other thing I was obsessed with, you know, when I was in high school, the couple guys I played with, their dads were casino musicians, you know, and at the tail end of that stuff, when it was drying up, but they still made pretty good money, and they were really good musicians, and I was never good enough to ever play in gigs like this, but they did like casino floor shows, and you know, they all had showgirl girlfriends, and you know, we were working 3 hours 4 hours a night, and you know, had cool places to live, and so I knew that wasn't for me because I wasn't that good, and I'm too weird. I'd rather play something a little more aggressive, I guess. And those guys, they get, you know, they had a red telephone that would light up if they were getting too weird. Like, so they were really like pushed down if they tried to be creative. But I always was like, man, that'd be pretty fun to live with a showgirl and play a floor show 4 hours a night, and then, you know, and then you got the whole day free. So I got to write about casinos and stuff like that, and think about that a little bit. So
nice. I wonder if you'd mind reading a little bit from the horse.
Sure.
And if you don't have, do you have a particular section that you've been reading on the book tours, or is there any particular section?
Yeah. I mean,
by the way, you said you own 3 horses. I'll tell you a horse joke. We also have a horse. And you know the 2 things that horses are afraid of?
Yes, I do. Everything. Do? No, I know this joke, but I can't remember right now.
Things that move and things that don't move.
Yes.
Yeah.
And brother, that is true. Like, I got my eye out there. We have a horse that I have out on the pasture, but he's has a tendon issue. So I keep my eye on him, make sure he doesn't get weird. But you're right. Like the other day, right when I put him out, my neighbor starts chainsawing and cutting trees, and he freaks out. But then I had this sawzall, like I'd been on working and in our pasture with a sawzall, and he'll come over and like nudge me and like want to hang out with it. So like, what scares them and what doesn't is never ending. It's really weird. Well, maybe I'll read a section about Al, why he starts playing music.
Okay.
Buck Owens recorded a record in Reno at John Esquaga's Nugget, and I was obsessed with the record. Now that's later, but you know, I know he played Reno earlier, so this is just inspired by the record Buck did. At 14, Al was 6 feet 3 inches tall. His hair jet black and his eyes light blue. His face was dotted with acne, and he weighed 113 pounds. His body was his constant embarrassment. Just undressing in PE revealed to all the rivers of blue veins under his skin and the bones of his skeletal frame. 14 was also the year he experienced his first prolonged mental anguish over the death of his Uncle Vern. Within a week of hearing the news, he became paralyzed in a sort of panic fit that wouldn't abate. He couldn't sleep and had no appetite or energy. Vern had been not only his uncle, but also his best friend and his only confidant. His mother refused to talk about her brother, so Al never told her or anyone how broken he was by the loss or admitted the panic and sadness that followed his uncle's death. 14 was also the year his mother's part-time boyfriend, Herb Marks, stopped in front of the duplex in a white Pontiac Grand Prix. From the kitchen window, Al and his mother saw him pull up, and Al grabbed his coat and left. Inside the car was warm and had white leather interior and clear plastic floor mats covering white carpet. Herb, a bulky bald man with a wax mustache, owned 3 auto parts stores and smoked 2 cigarettes on the drive to John Squaga's Nugget to see Buck Owens and the Buckaroos. This was years before Buck was Hee-Haw Owens, but even so, the casino's smaller main-floored lounge was full, and the band came to the stage in sparkly blue nudie suits. Buck grinned his big toothy smile and said witty things in between songs. The Buckaroos played with a sort of controlled abandon, and Buck acted like he was the happiest man who had ever lived on earth. Maybe it was because Al's mother and Vern had always had the country station on, or maybe it was because he'd never been to a live music show before. But seeing Buck Owens that night became a marker for everything after. It wasn't the suits or the adulation that came from being on stage that attracted him, nor the idea of money or fame. It was that when they played, he disappeared. When they played, suddenly Al wasn't Al anymore. He was transported inside the noise and rhythm and melody and story. It was as though suddenly he understood that by just a song playing, he was able to vanish from himself.
Yeah, man. Beautiful. Really enjoying this book. Like I said, I've both read it and listened to you read it on Audible, and I'll probably go back to it again. That I sure related to that moment when he got the butterscotch telly too. That was
Yeah, it's that idea. My brother. My brother was how I got into playing guitar. My brother was a kind of a folk songwriter, and my brother was really cool. And my brother told me, he goes, man, you should start writing songs. You've got a monkey on your back. You should write some songs about it. I mean, I was really like 11 or 12 when he said that. But I tried to play his guitar, and it was a right-handed guitar, and I'm really left-handed, and I didn't understand it, and I gave up on it. And then he found a left-handed electric guitar, and my mom rented it. He got my mom to rent it for me. And then she bought it for me. And then I was off to the races. It's probably like, man, for her, it was probably the biggest mistake of her life is doing that. Because she, poor, the long-suffering mother, she slept. I was in the basement, under her room, and I'd be playing all night, and then she'd just like keep hammering she'd stomp on the floor and say, yell down like, turn it down, come on, please, I have to get up. And my poor mom, man, she worked for most of my life. She worked 5.5 days a week, and I mean, she worked all the time, man. And the poor lady hated that I was a musician, and she had to hear it, and I wasn't very good to boot. So,
is she still with us?
No, man. She died like 15 years ago, really.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she was not a fan, man. She
wasn't?
No, man. She didn't like the music stuff. She came to, the funniest time, she tried a little bit. She didn't like the books. She really hated the books, but she tried with the band. Me and this buddy, and when we were in our early 20s, we got offered to play the 3 to 6 a.m. at a casino bar. And we were young, man. We were probably like, he was underage. I think I was 21. And we thought, man, who goes to a bar between 3 and 6? That's usually when you start heading home. And we thought, man, it's going to be some really wild people. Like, why would you have a bar at 3 to 6? So we were thinking like, well, we'll do like 7-minute long psychedelic jams. There'll probably be a lot of gothic people. So let's do some just weird noise stuff. We had absolutely no idea. And so we get there, and it's just like they wanted Bob Seger, and we got fired by the end of the first set. The bartender was so nice, man. She was a really nice lady. And right before we started playing, before she heard us, she gets a call, and it was my mom. And my mom's like, "Hey, well, I'm gonna come down and watch you because I'm gonna take my morning walk and catch you guys at like 5 o'clock in the morning. Is that cool?" And I was like, "Sure, mom." And then, and then we played, and then poor lady had to fire us. She paid us, but she fired us. And I had to call my mom and go, by the way, I called my mom like at 4:30 in the morning because she gets up early. And I was like, yeah, the gig fell through, mom. Don't worry about it. And the funny thing is we thought we could quit our jobs, by doing this gig. We were already planning to quit our jobs because it paid like $300, so 150 each guy, and we were gonna in a parking lot. We had a Coleman stove that we were gonna cook breakfast because we're like, who doesn't want breakfast at 6 a.m. and when they're coming off a long bender. And so we had all these brilliant plans about making it big, and fuck, man, we got fired within the first set.
It's a great story. That's a great story. Hey, I don't want to keep any longer. Maybe just a couple super quick, kind of short answer questions, if you don't mind, to wind this up. Is that all right? Yeah. Okay. So let's see. What do you like most about living in Portland?
I mean, the weather's amazing. The musicians are amazing. The art's amazing. The city's been beat up a little bit in the last few years, but it's like a great progressive city. And man, it's got a great river running through it. It's a classic. I can't say enough good things about it. Plus, Portland's got the best bookstores, and it has more movie theaters per capita than any other place I've ever seen. So, it's a huge, one of the great American cities, I think.
And it's got Patterson Hood as well.
Yeah, man, one of the great American songwriters.
Yes, this is too hard of a question. I get it, but just I'm curious what comes to mind if I said, what's the most memorable gig you've ever played? The one that you just when you look back, you think, man, that gig, that was it.
There's two. We opened up, Richmond Fontaine opened up for Willie Nelson. And Willie Nelson was my personal saint because, like I mentioned earlier, my mom was not a fan of rock and roll, and she wasn't a fan of any of it, but she loved Willie Nelson. And I kept thinking to myself, like, but he's a long-haired, dope-smoking hippie, and you like him, but why don't you like me?
I don't know how Willie did that, but he did.
But he's great because
got the rednecks and the hippies together.
And he's cool because he's his own guy, and he's the best guitar player. So he has always been my biggest hero that way, more than anything, I think, just because he's been a saint to me, like a little ally in my head. So opening up for him was really good. And then opening up for X, we opened up for Richmond Fontaine, opened up for X. And I remember it was when they got back together with Billy Zoom. And I remember John Doe. I didn't know John Doe at the time, but I'm pals with him now. But back then, he goes, "Man, you guys are like the weirdest, like cross between psychedelic and like garage rock and cowpunk." He goes, "You guys are wild." And I don't know if it was a compliment or not, but it was just awesome to talk to him, because I'd been secretly dressing like him since I was 13, So those two were really memorable. And the greatest news, man, on both those, which is the most important thing, is I found out who was making the posters, because I didn't care about the gigs as much as I wanted the reminder of it. And so I found out who was making the posters, and I said, "Man, you got to put our names on there." And I swear, if you make it a little bigger than normal, I'll be so happy. And I'm looking at both of them right now that, we're the guy that did the post, because they're big time bands. The posters were amazing, like silk screen kind of posters. And I just wanted the posters because I was going to like, this is probably the only great thing that's ever going to happen to me. And both times we looked like the band's name looked big and cool. And yeah, it was really, really fun, man. I'm looking at
this
right now.
Hey, they're hanging on your wall.
Oh yeah, man.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So, say something, if you will, about Bob Dylan. I mean, we could talk a long time about what has he meant to you in a nutshell?
I mean, Bob, Bob Dylan's like, for me personally, he was never a guy that got me through the night, but he's the guy that you always listen to all the time, trying to figure out how come he writes such great songs, one after another after another. And so it's two things. Like, he's never been like, I was in a band. Dave Harding of Richmond Fontaine was obsessed with Dylan, and he taught me a lot about Dylan. He had a ton of bootlegs, and we went through all the phases of Dylan, and he kind of, like a scholar, kind of walked me through them. And so he's kind of like one of those writers that's so good, it's hard to even fathom what they're doing, but also you can learn so much from him. But again, he never got me through the night. Like, see, a guy like Tom Waits had got me through some bad times in my life. And Dylan, the best times, I guess the only really good times I had with my dad, we listened to Nashville Skyline. And so that record always meant a lot to me. But no, yeah, Dylan, when you're trying to write good songs, you just got to listen to some Dylan songs, and then you scrap like your last 50 tunes, and you're like, ah, shit, man, I gotta start over. But,
yeah, right on. What are you listening to now? What kind of music? What bands or artists do you typically listen to these days?
I mean, at home, man, to be honest, I only listen to spaghetti Western. I think my wife drives her crazy. I got this. Hold on, I'll show you.
Yeah.
I got this Ecstasy of Gold compilation. It's 10 records of spaghetti Western. And yeah, I guess that's, if my house is burning, I'd probably grab those records, a couple books, and my guitars. But I listen to that a lot. What else I've been listening to? I listen to Kamasi Washington a lot, the jazz.
Yeah.
I've been listening to Charlie Crockett.
Yeah.
I like him a lot. I've been listening to Bjork, like her old stuff a lot. She's so wild, man. She's so wild and weird. And I've been listening to a lot of Merle Haggard, because Merle's probably my favorite country songwriter. So I've been following him, Jimmy Rogers, which I'd never listened to. I didn't know anything about him. So this last year, I've been listening to a lot of him. I've been listening to a lot of him, just doing chores and stuff, because you got horses, so you're always like fixing shit or cleaning up shit. So I listen to him a lot.
Nice.
And I guess I used to be madly in love with Bobby Gentry, and I just kind of backslid and started going out with her again in my mind.
Nice.
I fall in love with her and Sammy Smith are my two country girlfriends.
Yeah.
And I think I probably married Sammy Smith, and then Bobby Gentry ran me over in a car, trying to. So,
and who are you reading these days?
Well, right now I'm reading a guy named William Boyle, a great crime novelist. He's a buddy of mine, and I just got his book. I just read Kevin Barry's new book, in Heart of Winter, which I think is amazing. Probably my favorite book of the last couple of years is a short novel, Claire Keegan's Small Things Like These, which I think is one of the most brilliant books for me that I've read in a few years. And the only other one I'd really recommend is Lucia Berlin, A Manual for Cleaning Women. I always try to promote her because her books are so amazing, about the short stories, but following her whole life. She had like a weakness for jazz musicians.
Mm-hmm.
She had a real bad drinking problem, but she's really zen about it. And beautiful. I mean, the writing's just beautiful, but fun. I got that was the one of the great days of my life was, Amy Boone, the singer, was next to me listening to the audiobook. The drummer was in the front seat, and I could see him reading Lucia Berlin, the stories that I bought him. And the drummer and I were talking about Lucia Berlin. And I was like, my God, if I've done anything, at least I got these three people obsessed with this writer. So
nice. Did you ever get into William Eastlake?
Oh man, I've read, no, man. I've read one novel of his years ago and I can't remember it. So I remember reading it and I can't remember the title. It's this famous one.
Well,
Very,
it's probably, let me look at my shelf here. It's probably, I would think he would be someone that you would be definitely interested in. I'm not seeing a portrait of a, let's see, let's see. It's a play on portrait of the artist as a young man, but it's called Portrait of an Artist with 26 Horses.
oh wow, I don't know that one.
Yeah, and the Bronx People and Go in Beauty.
Okay.
Man, they're put together. There's a volume that puts all three of those short novels together. I highly recommend it. It seems right up your alley.
Okay, man, I'll check that out because I think I read them when I was too young.
Yeah,
It's like music. Like there's some certain music that I've heard that I didn't understand at first,
sure,
and
sure.
you got to go back to it and hit the right mood. And I'm definitely like that with novels.
Well, Eastlake, one of the things I love about him is you can't get through 3 pages without laughing out loud.
Oh, good. Yeah,
And,
man.
and so he's good to lift your spirits. Man, it is such an honor to speak with you. Thank you so much for taking this time. I'm going to put links in the show notes and encourage anyone who doesn't know your music or your books to go check them out. Is there anything in particular any place you want me to point them? I guess just willyvlautin.com or whatever
Yeah,
the website.
yeah, that's probably good enough. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. That's
Well,
really
man,
nice of you.
carry on, and I want to tell you if I haven't told you through email or something that our mutual friend Will Johnson recently told me that he thinks you're one of the living greats.
Oh yeah, man. I'm excited to read your book about him. And well, yeah, I think we had talked through email about him, and uh, I mean, I those first two solo records, a guy I played with moved to Texas and sent them up to me, and I've been a fan ever since.
Yeah,
But like I told you, the Carlton Chronicles of South San Gabriel
yeah,
was a record that really floored me, and I must have ripped off. I'm thinking it seriously, probably like 8 to 15 times I tried to rip off, or not rip off, but be inspired by them. And I'd write these songs in my band, go, man, that sure sounds a lot like South San Gabriel. And I'm like,
yeah.
yeah, I know. And then I wouldn't listen to them for a long time, hoping to shake it. And then I'd find myself backsliding and listening to it. And then I'd come to the practice with another one and then go, man, that's the same song you brought in, but with just a few different chords and a couple
Great.
different lines. So yeah, I mean, he's a legend, man.
Yeah.
Luckily he tours, man. So I've seen him a few times in Portland over the last couple of years, and he likes Reno, man. So
Oh, and
he
he's
could be
got a
another.
pretty good gig now playing with Jason.
Oh yeah, man. I'm always happy about that.
Yeah,
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 it's so fun when you see uh, musicians you really admire having good gigs and knowing
yeah,
they're making money and
yeah.
surviving. And now more people are going to hear about his music because he's doing bigger gigs, even as a sideman. And I mean, it's going to help him in the long run.
You bet.
So yeah, he's a legend, man.
You guys, the Delines going to come to Texas ever?
Right. Man, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, we tour when we're touring, we probably tour 3 months a year, but it's always in Europe. I don't know. I don't know.
Okay. Well,
I don't know what we're doing touring wise, US. Like our situation in Europe's going pretty good. So
uh-huh.
I'm relieved about that. I always want us to tour but I'm the one that wants it. So I don't know.
Last question. Are you already working on the next novel?
Oh yeah, man. I always have one. I've always battled confidence problems, and so I always have one half done by the time one of them comes out. So like if people hated the horse, I'd go, well, that's all right because I got my new one's the one, and I did that. That's how I kept Fontaine together so long too. I mean, the way we kept Fontaine together is we were commies. Each guy got the same cut regardless of everything, and then I'd always have like almost a record done by the time our record came out, and I'd say, well, we'll break up after we record this new batch, and they
Right.
go, okay, and then we kept going like that for like 20 years, where I'd always have something going so it wouldn't give us time to think. It doesn't give you time to ponder, like, what the hell have I done with my life? You're like, well, I just got to either finish this record, finish this book, and then I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've been doing that. That's just a trick I've used to keep myself going, I guess.
Nice. Well, I'll definitely look for it. Willie, thank you again so much. Really appreciate your
man,
time.
nice putting a seeing your face and compared to just emailing. So
yeah, cool. Right on, man. Well, hey, you take care, and we'll look for you down the road.
All right, man. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.